Hello there. I'm just going to carry on with looking through the New Yorker article by Rachel Aviv, and to start off where we left off, carry on reading it and making some observations and comments going through. So here we have, in June 2015, 3 babies died at the Countess. First, a woman with antiphospholipid syndrome, a rare disorder that can cause blood clotting, was admitted to the hospital. She was 31 weeks pregnant with twins and had planned to give birth in London so that a specialist could monitor her and the babies, but her blood pressure had quickly risen and she had to have an emergency C-section at the Countess. The next day, Lucy Letby was asked to cover a colleague's night shift. She was assigned one of the twins, a boy, who had been called Child A. Open brackets, the court order forbade identifying the children. The court order forbade identifying the children, their parents, and some nurses and doctors. Yeah, so like Dr. B and Dr. A. So, don't think that was right. And there were other nurses that were given that anonymity as well. Don't think Dr. A should have had it. Don't see why he should have had it. And Dr. B. You know, Dr. B was one of the group of 4s, but gets to be anonymous. Doesn't seem fair to me. Likewise with Dr. A. Anyway. A nursing note from the day shift said that the baby had had no fluids, quote, no fluids running for a couple of hours. That's appalling, isn't it? Because his umbilical catheter, a tube that delivers fluids through the abdomen, had twice been placed in the wrong position and, quote, unquote, doctors busy, quote, doctors busy, unquote. So there we have not enough staff, not enough medical staff, and medical errors, doctor errors. A junior doctor eventually put in a long line, which is a thin tube threaded through a vein, and Lucy Letby and another nurse gave the child fluid. 20 minutes later, Lucy Letby and a third nurse, a few feet away, noticed that his oxygen levels were dropping. That's the baby, of course, and that his skin was mottled. The doctor who had inserted the long line worried that he had placed it too close to the child's heart, and he immediately took it out. But less than 90 minutes after Lucy Letby started her shift, the baby was dead. Quote, "It was awful," close quote, she wrote to a colleague afterward. Open quote, "He died very suddenly and unexpectedly just after handover." So you've got the mother with that medical problem. You've got this massively understaffed unit in a state of chaos, as I said in a previous recent video. According to Alison Timmis, who was a consultant working there, in chaos, that it isn't safe, and that the result it would be the deaths of children. That's what she says later in the year, and that it had been going for a long time, and that nobody's listening to the cries of that it's so overstretched, and there are way too many children for the amount of staff that they've got there to look after safely. A state of chaos, yeah. And then you've got the medical issues there, no fluids for 2 hours. The catheter being put in the wrong place. The long line possibly being misplaced, going too far, possibly even going into the heart. Sometimes they put it in too far and it goes into the tissues of the heart and they have to withdraw it. But they went for murder. They decided it was a murder because that makes sense, doesn't it? You know, and it's convenient because you don't have to look at what the doctors did, what the failures of the hospital as a whole, to not have enough staff there, to be working beyond their capacity with an acuity level of babies that are just beyond them to deal with, and so on and so forth. Plumbing problems, hospital wastewater coming up through the yin-yang everywhere, up through every orifice that you can think of in the hospital, i.e. the sinks and the toilets, over the floor, etc., etc. Keep coming back to that. Back to the article of Rachel Aviv. A pathologist observed that the baby had, open quotes, crossed pulmonary arteries. That's the pathologist who obviously did the post-mortem, which is a structural anomaly, and there was also a, open quotes, strong temporal relationship, close quotes, between the insertion of the long line and the collapse. This happened and that happened. But no, it's murder somehow. Yeah. By one of the nurses who actually eventually gave the poor child fluids, when it had been left without them. Because of doctors' errors and doctors not being there to do what they should do. Medical negligence, in short, by the doctors. The pathologist described the cause of death as unascertained, which, that came up in a recent one of the podcasts of We Need to Talk About Lucy Letby, is that's quite a common thing. It doesn't mean that it's open, that it's murder. It's just that you can't definitively say what exactly caused the death. It doesn't mean that it's a complete mystery in that sense. It's just that it could be a combination of reasons. That's what I remember Dr. Michael saying in that podcast. Dr. Michael McConville. Memory's going a bit. Next paragraph. Lucy Letby. I don't really like just saying the surname of someone. I just find it a bit rude. But Lucy Letby was on duty again the night after child A's death. At around midnight, she helped the nurse who had been assigned to the surviving twin, a girl, set up her IV bag, intravenous. About 25 minutes later, the baby's skin became purple and blotchy and her heart rate dropped. She was resuscitated and recovered. Breary, the unit's leader, told me, that must be Rachel Aviv, of course, that at the time he wondered if the twins had been more vulnerable because of the mother's disorder. Yeah, well, sounds likely, doesn't it? Antibodies for it can pass through the placenta. So early on they start thinking that, there's a rational reason for this, as well as the medical errors, but there's the mother's medical condition as well, but somehow all that goes away, doesn't it? And then when you've got a serial killer to find, then you mustn't think about all that kind of stuff. You've got to move it all out of the way. It's inconvenient, isn't it? Like all the signs of sepsis and necrotizing enterocolitis, hard word to say for me. Necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC, that Dr. Scott McLachlan talks a lot about in his Substack articles. I'll link. I'll do all the same links again. I'll do them on every episode of this sort of series, looking at this article. Definitely check out Dr. Scott McLachlan's, I think, more than 20 articles in which he goes through quite a number of the babies, by the initials, and looks at their stay in hospital and looks at all the signs of as they were declining and all the missed opportunities to help them from a medical point of view. The next day, a mother who had been diagnosed as having a dangerous placenta condition gave birth to a baby boy who weighed 1 pound 12 ounces. Okay, which was on the edge of the weight threshold that the unit was certified to treat. In other words, right on the edge of going through to a level 3 unit of, for example, the Liverpool Women's Hospital or Alderhay. They're both level 3, and at this time, 2015, the COCH, Countess of Chester Hospital, was a level 2. But in July 2016, it was relegated to level 1. So they had a level 1 that have to take babies only beyond 35 weeks gestation. Sorry, I went a bit off tangent there, but which was on the edge of the weight threshold that the unit was certified to treat. Back to the article. Within 4 days, the baby developed acute pneumonia. So this is a tiny, tiny, tiny baby, incredibly underweight and premature with acute pneumonia. Lucy Letby was not working in the intensive care nursery where the baby was treated, but after the child's oxygen alarm went off, she came into the room to help. Yet the staff on the unit couldn't save the baby. A pathologist determined that he had died of natural causes. Several days later, a woman came to the hospital after her water broke. She was sent home and told to wait. More than 24 hours later, she noticed that the baby was making fewer movements inside her. Quote, "I was concerned for infection because I hadn't been given any antibiotics," close quote, she said later. She returned to the hospital, but still she wasn't given any antibiotics. She felt, quote, "forgotten by the staff, really," close quote. She said, 60 hours after her water broke, she had a C-section. 60 hours. The baby, a girl who was dusky and limp when she was born, should have been treated with antibiotics immediately, doctors later acknowledged, but nearly 4 hours passed before she was given the medication. So we're seeing again and again and again, and all this came up in Dr. Scott McLachlan's analysis of all, pretty much, not all of them, but the vast majority of the babies that were formed part of the case. We're seeing these this medical negligence, these medical errors, these essential treatment that's missing, and these ridiculous amounts of time without antibiotics and without fluids for these babies. Okay, nearly 4 hours passed before she was given the medication. The next night, the baby's oxygen alarm went off. I'm trying to understand this next bit. Oh, right. Open quotes. Called staff nurse Letby to help. Close quotes. A nurse wrote, so that's a nursing note that Lucy Letby was called to help. The baby continued to deteriorate throughout the night and could not be revived. A pathologist found pneumonia in the baby's lungs and wrote that the infection was likely present at birth. Open quotes. We lost her. Close quotes. Lucy Letby texted a close friend, "I'll call Margaret." So that's Rachel Aviv, the journalist, saying she's calling this friend Margaret for the sake of anonymity, who's a shift leader on the unit. So Margaret had mentored Lucy Letby when she was a student training on the ward, which would have been back to 2011, I think, 11-12, I think at the end of the year she joined at 2011 into 2012 after doing her nursing degree at Chester University. And then it's another bit of dialogue here. So, open quotes, "What? But she was improving," close quotes, Margaret replied. "What happened? Want to chat?" This is all texting, you know. "Want to chat? I can't believe you're on again," meaning Lucy Letby. "You're having such a tough time," close quotes. Lucy Letby told Margaret that the circumstances of the death might be investigated. And then Margaret says, What? The delay in treatment?" Lucy Letby replies, "Just overall," she said, and reviewing what antibiotics she was on, etc., if it was sepsis, close quotes. Lucy Letby wrote that she was still in shock, open quotes, "feel a bit numb," close quotes. Margaret then replies, "Oh, hon, you need a break," close quotes. Margaret said that. Reflecting on the first of the 3 deaths, Margaret told her, i.e. Lucy, that the baby's parents would always grieve the loss of their child, but that because of the way Lucy Letby had cared for him, the boy, the poor baby boy, baby A, they'd hopefully have no regrets about the time they spent with their son. And then Margaret says, "Just trying to help you take the positives you deserve from tough times," close quote, Margaret wrote. "Always here, speak later, sleep well, kiss, kiss, kiss." That's how Margaret signs off her dialogue, conversation with Lucy Letby. A few days later, Letby couldn't stop crying. Lucy Letby couldn't stop crying. "It's all hit me," she texted another friend from the unit. She wrote that 2 of the deaths seemed comprehensible. One was, quote, "tiny, obviously compromised in utero," closed quote, and the other seemed septic, she wrote. But, quote, "it's child A I can't get my head around," close quote. That's Lucy Letby saying that in another text to a friend. The senior paediatricians met to review the deaths to see if there were any patterns or mistakes. Quote, "One of the problems with the neonatal deaths is that the preterm babies can die suddenly and you don't always get the answer immediately," Breary told me. You don't always get the answer immediately. I remember making a note about this. I've got some notes here as well. In that when you come to this ridiculous Operation Hummingbird video from Cheshire Police, you've got this absurd character, Detective Hughes, saying that he was told by the consultants and the doctors is that there are never any unexpected deaths. This is what he says, pretty much. There are no unexpected deaths and no unexpected crashes. Everybody knows, including the parents, when there's going to be a death and when there's going to be a crash. I mean, it's so absurd, it's ridiculous. But that's part of the nonsense that he's spouting. He allegedly is getting that from what he was told, and so it's just all very weird and strange, you know. And then going back to the Rachel Aviv article, a study of about 1,000 infant deaths in southeast London, published in the Journal of Maternal, Fetal and Neonatal Medicine, found that the cause of mortality was unexplained. This is really important, this bit. Was unexplained for about half the newborns who had died unexpectedly even after an autopsy. That's staggering. That's staggering for... The main reason why it's staggering is because a few years later, you get this character, this fraud, this narcissistic gimp called Dr. Dewey Evans. On the basis of a lot of shabby notes that are all out of order, his description of them, he can decide what are the explained and what are the unexplained deaths, and he can decide he can decide the explainable ones very easy. He tells us that in many interviews. He can tell us, he can sift through the 17 deaths that he was given. I think 16 actually, because I don't think he had the August 2016 death, because he only asked for notes up to July 2016, because Lucy Letby wasn't on the unit anymore in August, which is another red flag, of course. But this guy, this character, Dewey Evans, the expert for prosecution, one of the most sinister elements of this, he can go through them very easily and can say, yeah, I found it very easy to show the explainable ones, very easy. I'll tell you why it was easier for him, because they're the ones, the 10 of them actually, probably 9, I think 9, that's my position on that, because of the August death of the late neonate baby that I don't think he had the notes for even, didn't need them, didn't want to look at them. He could discount those other 9 deaths very, very easily, because he knew who they were looking at, who the police were looking at. He knew who the consultants had been bullying and targeting for 2 years, for the last 2 years, effectively, since June 2015. And so he knew that she wasn't on duty for those, so he could knock all those out. He could just discount them and say they're explainable, leaving all the unexplainable ones, which, of course, he pretends he doesn't even know what Lucy Letby's name. He pretends that he doesn't even know it. There's so many red flags to give us that he knows it. He's reading through medical notes. I've done this in really old videos from 7, 8, 9 months ago. He's reading through medical notes in which her name is the most salient, the most repeated nurse name and initials that he's seeing, because she does so many hours and so many nights. But the ones he's left with that he decides are all unexplainable, other than through intended harm. So in other words, they can't be medically explained, or because of the situation of the medical status of the mum, or what was going on, or the other signs of sepsis, etc., etc., pneumonia, all other kinds of things going on. It can only be explainable through intended harm. And yet we have a study of 1,000 infants in which, as a generality, only, what did it say here? Only half of them, I'll read it properly, found that the cause of mortality was unexplained for about half the newborns who had died unexpectedly. So you're back to there obviously are unexpected deaths, and even after autopsy. So like we're looking at 500 there that are essentially the cause of mortality is unexplained even after autopsy, and yet you've got this perfect record of unexplained and explained, and the division between them, that this utter fraud and charlatan Dowie Evans can pull off just like that on the basis of a bunch of shabby and disorganised notes years down the line. But all the people doing the autopsies of these 1,000 babies in this study, all those autopsies, like 500 of them, the actual people doing the autopsy can't come to a cause of mortality. It remains unexplained. But the guy can do it perfectly, 100%, 2 years down the line on a bunch of shabby notes. I think that's the most important point about that, for me anyway. It shows how unrealistic and unreliable this creature is, and it shows what underlies that is he knew what he had to pick. He knew which cases he had to pick, and he knew, as importantly, which ones he had to jettison. Because the last thing you want to do, and it will come up later about the insulin cases, where we know he's done that. We know he's done it. I'll leave that till later. He mustn't get one wrong. He mustn't say, oh God, there's intended harm here, and we find Lucy Letby's not on duty. Oh God, he mustn't do that. If he did it, they've got to put him right, haven't they? And they did. They do later on with the insulin one. So we'll come to that later. Jesus Christ. Anyway, Breary observed that Lucy Letby was involved in each of the deaths at the Countess. Well, he observed it, okay. But, open quotes, it didn't sound to me, this is Breary talking, it didn't sound to me like the odds were that extreme of having a nurse present for 3 of those cases, he said. Nobody had any concerns about her practice. It's difficult this because they're all talking retrospectively, but very soon he has concerns. And in other articles and in other aspects of it, that it's the idea that there was some kind of review done, and that the seeds of his concern about Lucy Letby, his what I mean by concern like that is his scapegoating of her, his bullying of her, his decision to focus on her in the psychopathic way of psychopaths, the way they do, and narcissists the way they do. Him and Jairam particularly. Jairam probably comes in a bit later. They share an office. They're very tight. Nobody had any concerns about her practice. That's what he's saying there. It's all, they're just changing the script as it suits them, going further back, because in a way, and I just realised actually why he's changing the script a little bit. He's tweaking the script a little bit because of the legitimate criticisms of that if he thought there was intended harm going on there, murder, why didn't he report it to the police straight away? But why didn't he go to this thing called the Child Death Overview Panel, which is what Dr. Michael McConville and Peter are talking about all the time in the We Need to Talk About Lucy Letby podcasts over on Spotify, and they're on other platforms as well. Why didn't he at that point go to the Child Death Overview Panel? which is what he should have done, which is what the protocol says he should have done, but no, he didn't do it. So he's kind of backfilling and saying, oh, well, I didn't think anything at that point, but we know he thought he did. We know he did. We know he did. Yeah, he's having his cake and eat it, really, time. Because they know they've got a problem. They know they've got problems to answer, Breary and Jayaram, going forward as this thing moves forward, as the truth will come out. They'll be caught in all their lies. They'll be caught in all their scripting. They'll be caught in all their fabrication. They'll be caught in all their scapegoating and bullying. They'll be caught. They will be caught. Just hope it's sooner rather than later. The head of the paediatrics department, Ravi Jayaram, I didn't know he was there. I didn't think he was there. I thought it was this Dr. Gibbs. He was the senior one. So you've got this lead, a head. I don't understand all the terms because we're meant to believe that Breary is the lead. So this other guy is the head. I don't know. Perhaps it doesn't matter. But the head of the paediatrics department, Ravi Jayaram, told me. So he's obviously been flapping his gums as well as Breary. And I think Evans does later down the line as well. Open quotes. There was an element of, thank God Lucy was on. Oh God, they're doing it again. He's doing it as well. Rescripting. Because she's a really good in a crisis. They want people now to believe that early on they had no doubts about her, no thoughts about her, and they thought she was great because she's good in a crisis. Whereas in other interviews, in other areas, they say that after those 3 deaths, they began to look at her. They did. Jayaram, and it's not Jayaram, sorry, Breary, then Jayaram, and then possibly Gibbs and Dr. B. I think they're kind of also-rans, that's what I consider them to be. The dark heart of the Gang of Four, as it were, is Jayaram and Breary. I think Breary and Jayaram, 2 sides of the same narcissistic, possibly psychopathic coin of bullies, narcissists. Feeling quite angry today about this. What's happened with the refusal to give Lucy Letby the chance to appeal, and these bastards are out there being thought of as heroes by some, with Jayaram going to these events talking about being a whistleblower. Disgusting. So I don't know if I can do much more of this tonight. There was an element, not the article's fantastic, it's disgusting, isn't it? The head of the paediatrics department, Ravi Jayaram, there was an element of thank God Lucy was on because she's really good in a crisis, yeah, until you start saying that she's a murderer, just until then. He described Lucy Letby as, quote, very popular, close quote, among the nurses. To make sense of the events, Jayaram said, quote, you sort of think, well, maybe the baby wasn't as stable as we thought. And maybe the long line was in just a bit far, and it got into the heart, as I was saying before, and caused a heart rhythm problem. You try and make things fit, because we like to have an explanation for us and the parents, and it's much harder to say, I'm sorry, I don't know what went on. Look at all this re-scripting and reframing. This terrible reframing here, so that all the possibilities there of why it might have happened, why that crash and that death might have happened there. He's giving us to them. He's giving us them all. He's giving us them all about the long line, and the baby wasn't stable. So what changed? So what changed about this case? They're going to start accumulating them. And because they're accumulating them, then this case becomes reframed and turned into something else. But then they forget about the fact. He's forgetting about the fact that it could be the long line and the stability of the baby, and the health condition of the mum, and the possible sepsis. Well, the absolute definite sepsis that's crawling all over that unit, and the chronic and awful understaffing, the chaos, as Alison Timmis says. The paediatrician Alison Timmis wrote to the CEO, as I said in the other video, wrote to Tony Chambers, the chaos, the dangerousness of that unit. She wrote later in the year, but she was talking about a chronic situation that had lasted for a long time, in which she says in that email, nobody is listening to us. It's been going on for a long time. It's been going on since this period, since this spike in deaths in the summer of 2015. I'll finish this this part here. I'm just going to look at my notes a minute. Yeah, just looking at my notes a bit there. So back on that paragraph, I'll just reprise it a bit. So Jayaram is backfilling, and they're both doing the same thing, because they both want to get out of the criticism that, well, if you thought there was a murderer in the unit back in 2015 after those first 3 deaths, if you thought it, why didn't you do anything about it? Why didn't you do anything about it? So they've got to reinvent all that little bit, while at the same time, the issue here is that after those 3 deaths in quick succession, I know for a fact that, well, I've seen it reported everywhere over the last X number of months, that Breary did set up a review of those deaths. He asked for a review of them, so he was concerned about them, and as a result of that review, well, it didn't say explicitly that anything about Lucy Letby at all, but I remember elsewhere that it is after those 3 deaths in 2015 that they begin to, Breary and then Jayaram, begin to focus on Lucy Letby. I think it's from then onwards. Yeah, I think that's when the gossip starts, you see. That's when the gossip starts, because we hear later on about Jayaram even talking in a bloody canteen queue, but with other people, about they're thinking that Lucy Letby is a murderer and stuff like that. So they're blabbing, they're flapping their gums all over the shop, these bastards. And the rumours are starting already. That's what I believe. That's what I suspect and believe. But the other thing I wanted to say that I put in my notes, I'll just have a look. I said about Brewery Institute some kind of review in relation to those 3 deaths that were discussed then so far in the article, shortly after they happened. It's just this idea of the pattern of the pattern of the quote unquote murderer. So you've got this serial killer that kills 3 babies in quick succession here. They're on the top of their game. They're very good at it. They can do it bang, 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 like very, very quick. No problems at all. And yet, as this period goes on in which there are further deaths happen that are then attributed and made into murders by this awful investigation and Evans and the ridiculous CPS and judiciary, this very, very skillful, high-intensity murderer becomes worse at what they're doing, keeps failing at it, and they have a 4-month gap. They have a 4-month gap after that, when they just stop all completely after these 3 deaths in the summer of 2015. They just stop. And thereafter, they keep on, it's just, there's lots of attempted murders happening. So they just can't do it then, but they've found a way to do it. Lucy could do it very, very efficiently, so we're led to believe. Very efficient murders, one after the other, stops completely, apart from making half attempts that are failing all the time. You get it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. And then you've got the whole issue of, the serial killer using all these different approaches, It's just all rubbish. It's appalling. We went through all that kind of stuff in much earlier videos about none of it smells right, none of it is right, none of it seems right. It's all been shoehorned and distorted and twisted to fit this ridiculous story. And you're getting red flags coming up all the time here. So in this article, the way Breary and Jayaram are kind of making out as though they really liked Lucy there and were glad that she was on duty. It's a way of clearing them of the criticisms that other people have made. So, well, if you thought there was a killer there, well, why didn't you do something at the beginning? Because they were saying elsewhere that after those 3 deaths that Breary was focusing on Lucy after that. They just change it to suit them. They changed the story to suit them. The rumours were starting then, I believe. Absolutely. Anyway, I'll leave it there. It's going to take a long time to go through this article, but it's just what an awful decision today, a political decision, and a corrupt decision. Corrupt judges. Don't care if you hear this. Don't care what you think. Don't care what you think, Cheshire Police. Don't care. You're corrupt. You're corrupt. Judiciary's corrupt. All of you. Don't care. Don't care what you think about that. It's the truth. And it's going to be proved that it's the truth. This monstrous miscarriage of justice, it's going to blow up in all your faces. It will, because we're not going to stop all the people that are concerned about this. I'm just someone without, I've got no medical or legal or scientific or statistical training at all. It doesn't, but there's lots of people involved that have, lots of nurses, lots of professional people, lots of doctors, nurses, mathematicians, statisticians, scientists involved that have got loads and loads of background on this, and they're working on it continually from 100 different angles. A lot of work going on into the insulin cases. All sorts of things are happening. It's just going to carry on. It's going to grow exponentially. Not sure what to say about this other thing, but I'll just leave you with this, that there's a sense that we're hearing is that there's quite a number of mainstream, I'm not going to say any names, mainstream media journalists are very, very concerned about this case, especially since reading this article, but they've been concerned for a while, and they're champing at the bit to start moving on this. Investigative journalists, people with heart and people with a conscience. They're champing at the bit. They can't do it at the moment because of the reporting restrictions, but they're waiting. Once they're lifted, it's going to start pouring out more. It really will. It really will. Thank you. Cheers.